Hey guys, Argent here, and we have a rather grim, or should I say dank, topic to discuss today. So we're going to talk about suicide. Because I think a lot of people can't really understand it. They're like, I don't understand why people commit suicide. How does that help the situation? How does that improve the situation? Why don't they just do blank, 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 or blank? Well, as someone who is suicidal a substantial amount of the time, and has been pretty much all my life. Um, I think I can probably offer a fairly good perspective on this. And I suppose this is as much therapy as anything, but I think a lot of people probably haven't had these thoughts in their life, and they might find it interesting to talk about it. I also do these because I hope that by talking about this in such a public fashion, it contributes in my own small way for us to have like a conversation about this and to talk about this. Because there are a lot of people who have this feelings, a lot of people who are suffering and can't talk about it. There's also a lot of people who go through therapy, who go through the right processes, who try to do the right thing, and they just don't really come out in one piece. And it's a rather painful experience overall. So let's get into the topic. So a bit about my experience with it. I have been more or less suicidal as far back as I can remember. One of my earlier memories is I remember back in grade 4 or 5, I used to think about it all the time. I used to refer to myself as a reject of the human race. I used to kind of fantasize about dying in a glorious way. I used to fantasize about sticking my face in a pillow until my brain died of oxygen deprivation. And all these things just seemed really pleasant. So there was that, and it kind of continued as I got older. Sometimes I often couldn't sleep, in part because just this all powerful, I think Freud called it distrato or thanatos, this all powerful death drive would just keep consuming me. And this continued pretty much all throughout my life up into the present. I can't really remember a time in my life where I kind of haven't been. I mean, I'm not suicidal all the time, but but by haven't been and have been, I mean I do think about it at least once a week, oftentimes far more, oftentimes daily. Um, so it is ever present. I remember back when my parents were kind of in a state of delusion because they didn't want me to be diagnosed with a serious mental illness because my grandmother has one and she was kind of abusive towards my mother. So they didn't want it. Also, my mother blames herself in a public fashion for passing her genes on to me. So I mean, there's all that to deal with. But no, it just kind of got worse and worse as I got older. I remember in high school, I got in trouble for saying that, like, what are your plans for the future? And I would say, well, honestly, I don't really expect to see 20. I don't expect that I will survive that long. I think I'll probably kill myself by the time I'm 20. And that wasn't taken seriously, of course. That was taken as me trying to be a smartass. And then we had, what is your goals for the next 6 months? And I put down to not die. And that was once again treated as a disciplinary thing and treated as me being really kind of disobedient of authority. So that theme was kind of constant. I would talk about it a lot. I would describe kind of my fantasies in that way. I've never really made a plan. It's not really kind of about that. But yeah, so in high school, before I started taking medication for the first time, I started to hurt myself. Now, I guess this is an opportunity also to talk about self-harm. Why do people engage in self-harm? I think I've read that the biological reason is it releases certain chemicals that calm you down. Because I knew whenever I inflicted pain on myself, it would calm me down. Just your brain is just kind of racing and pounding, and there's just such extreme emotional distress and pain, and hurting yourself takes away from that, if only for a little while. Like I never cut myself. I pinched myself. I stabbed myself with pencils really hard. I stabbed myself with pens. I would punch myself. And actually, by the time they finally got me on medication, I was starting to get rather bruised from the kind of beatings I would inflict upon myself. So that actually, I don't think people understand, if you kind of haven't been in this situation, just how bad it feels. It literally feels like you're dying. I describe depression, particularly agitated depression, as being in a dark pit, being chewed on and devoured alive by rats. And there is a physical side to severe depression. I experience really brutal nerve pain a lot of the time. The current medication I take, Cymbalta, is also used to treat nerve pain, so it helps that out. But all through my life, I've been kind of dependent upon over-the-counter painkillers because it helps with that. But it kind of feels like that, and it kind of feels like there's an electric shock running through your body, and all your nerves are on fire. And when you hit yourself, it releases chemicals that really help to suppress that pain and calm you down. And it's also, it depends how psychotic you are. I have some slight psychotic features, more in terms of thinking. I don't see things or hear things that aren't there, but I do have kind of paranoid aspects. So for a lot of people, it also, if they're cutting, they feel that they're relieving pressure, because they feel such immense pressure from their anxiety and depression. Kind of in a twisted way, they feel that by cutting themselves and bleeding, it's relieving that internal pressure. You also have to understand that there's a high level of self-loathing associated with depression. I think that's something you can't really underestimate. When you're dealing with depression, you hate yourself. Oftentimes, particularly if you're bipolar, you view yourself in an extremely negative way. Because the manic half of your personality tends to be very cold, ironically enough. Very kind of violent, aggressive, megalomaniacal, if you will. It's called megalomania for a reason. And you kind of want to kill yourself to save the world, so to speak. You think that you're, as a person, so bad, you're so kind of wicked, you want to kill yourself to spare the rest of the world. You want to kill yourself kind of to spare your parents. So let's just get into kind of we've gone through self-pain, self-harm. So let's talk about, why do people contemplate suicide? Simply put, people contemplate it because they can't see a way out. They can't see their situation improving. Now, part of that is, and I think I've read it up, that depression has certain effects on the brain, which makes your time scale a lot more present tense, if that makes any sense. I'm not a neurochemist. I just write some stuff about this. It changes certain chemicals in the brain, so 5 minutes seems like an eternity. So even if you started a new medication or something, and in a couple weeks they'll probably start working, that doesn't really provide you with any relief, because all you can do is think in the present tense. And it's a feedback loop. I mean, the more you kind of obsess over the present tense, the stronger the anxiety gets. The stronger the anxiety gets, the more you obsess over the present tense. Um, the more you kind of get embroiled and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper embroiled into this until it becomes that's the only thing in your world. Um, Particularly before I started taking when I was back on Effexor that made me manic all the time, I would get so kind of manic I would almost become comatose because I was just so full of nervous energy, and just so full of nerve activity I'd kind of become overstimulated, and I'd kind of be incapable of moving from excessive energy, not from excessive lethargy. Mania can be just as crippling. Actually, it's often more crippling than depression. I have type 2 bipolar, so it's not as bad. But no, you want to kill yourself because you want liberation. You want it to end. You want, and there's kind of two types of it. There's kind of long-term suicidal ideation, and there's short-term. Short-term is you're going through a particularly bad spot. Maybe if you're bipolar, you've just gone through a mood switch. You're in between mood switches. You're just gone fucking basically crazy, and the emotions are so intense. You just try to kill yourself, or you do kill yourself because you just can't take it. It's like kind of being lit on fire and jumping off a cliff, so that you die the quicker, easier death. Versus longer term suicidal ideation, which comes from getting tired and worn down, because you have to keep fighting the same battle each and every day. You have to keep going through therapy, which never seems to work. You have to keep switching from one type of drugs to another. You just have to keep doing it. And sometimes it'll be years and years and years of therapy and years and years and years of drugs, and it doesn't really always help the pain. And you just kind of start giving up hope after a while, and it's nothing really irrational about that. It's just kind of natural after so much time to kind of give up hope and stop thinking anything can get better. And kind of to be one of these people, you often it negatively affects your life, and once again that's kind of a feedback loop. Your life is negatively affected by it. It makes everything else worse. It makes your finding a job harder. It makes interacting with people harder. It makes your family more difficult, and that stuff, that lack of kind of harmony in the personal life, just has an extremely debilitating effect on the disorder. So basically, what you get into is a combination of a couple different factors. Extreme chronic constant pain, a lack of hope that you'll ever be rid of the pain and for the future in general, and most importantly, a lack of motivation to try and get better. And that's kind of the worst part about depression, bipolar, or whatever your mental illness is. Generally speaking, it physically renders you almost incapable of seeking help or really trying. Because your worldview becomes so twisted. As I said, it's often chemical. I mean, your brain's lacking, or your brain has excessive amounts, or your neurons aren't firing properly, and your entire perception of reality is just so warped that you can't even, like, the idea won't even occur to you. It's like you tell a depressive person, well, why don't you try to be positive? And it's like telling someone to imagine a new color. It's just not something they can do. So that's kind of like the things that come together to make it. It's a general sense of hopelessness, it's being worn down over time, and it's kind of an inability to really even want to get out of this state. And people will, particularly kind of some bootstrap guys, will say, well, that's because they're lazy, that's because they're a poor moral character, that's because they don't want to work, that's because they don't want to work hard at anything. And that's not always the case. It's oftentimes just really hard, and very often society just doesn't understand. They kind of think it's just a bad attitude. They think you're just kind of a sour person. They just think that you're a misanthrope because you are. They think suicide is to get attention. Well, I'm sure some people are like that, but for a lot of people who have these very strong inclinations and desires, people do that sort of thing because they feel they have no other choice. They feel they have no other way out. There is an aspect of control to it that at least you can pick when you die. Even if the rest of your life is kind of controlled by this cancer in your brain, more or less, you can at least pick when you can die. You can at least have that little bit of freedom. So I think that's mostly what I wanted to say about suicide. I'm just trying to introduce people who probably have never undergone it, um, why they do it. It's kind of it's kind of a symptom of an extreme anxiety attack. Um, as I said, it's imagine I don't know, like a pipe that's just building up, building up, building up, building up pressure, and you want to just release that pressure, and that's like if you release it all at once, it explodes, and that's kind of what it feels like. So no, I've never tried to kill myself. I've never really seriously injured myself. Just some bruises and scrapes. I've never tried to burn myself or anything like that. Nor would I. Not really for emotional or personal reasons, but because of my religious beliefs and because of what it would do to my parents, I would never seriously consider doing it. But no, that's kind of a video on suicide, kind of a dank topic for today. I hope that's interesting. This